To have a reputation that precedes it. Well, the Fisheries Broadcast is not so much that type of show, because there's no other show like it. It is that show. And it's only because of that reputation that the Fisheries Broadcast is able to capture the colorful fabric of our culture while never losing sight of its main focus, the fishing industry. It's a program that's as informative as it is entertaining, as serious as it is witty. Well, this week, the Fisheries Broadcast turns 60 years old, and I'm joined now by host John Furlong. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I mean, there's lots of programs, newspapers, magazines, what have you out there that don't run out of material, but they just seem to lose their luster and they fade away. What is it about the broadcast that keeps it going?
Well, I think you just said it. There's no other show like it. And it's built from the ground up. It's built by the listener. It's built by the people who call in. It's a community building. It's an interactive program, even before the word interactive was ever invented. You don't have to be an important person to call the broadcast and get on, and people know that, and they have, I think, taken ownership of that. You get all the history of Newfoundland and Labrador. You get the feeling of what it's like to live in small communities. You get all the rich Newfoundland dialects. You know, as you alluded to, and as I describe it, it's the best little show on radio.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of everything on there. It's not just about the fishery, it's about the people.
Yeah.
You know, and as I said, I was talking about some other programs that haven't made it, of course, as long as the broadcast has. But any paper or magazine who has made it has generally gone some sort of resurrection over its life. Has the format of the broadcast really changed that much over the 60 years?
Well, I think quite a bit in the last probably 20 years, where there's been a lot of journalism brought to it. Initially, the broadcast was a litany of prices, the weather, the steamer report, messages to home, things like that. But in the last couple of years, probably 2 decades in my memory, there's been a lot of journalism brought to it, so people are made more accountable, and government has been made more accountable. And I think the fishermen and the fisherwomen have appreciated that there's somebody out there who can go to bat for them. It's not just an opinion they express, but there's somebody who will take a pointed stick and poke it at the government, and you know, that's what I like to see part of my role as.
And is that an intimidating job to take on? Because you're like me, you were a townie when you took over that role. So when you went and sat in the host chair, was there any amount of intimidation that came along with taking over that role?
Absolutely, until I realized that my innocence was something that I used in my favor. And so I was able to ask the most basic of questions and do it with a sweet innocence rather than a stupidity. So people didn't think, gee, what a moron. They just kind of came along for the ride, and we all learned about the fishery together. So I was able to say, well, what does that mean? And what does that mean? And what does that mean? And so my lack of knowledge about the fishery wasn't really a hindrance.
And, you know, one thing you mentioned there a few minutes ago was just, you know, the broadcast used to send messages to home. I mean, that alone can tell you how much has changed in the last 60 years that the broadcast would have to do that.
That's right.
And one really interesting thing that perhaps has helped keep it going, I would imagine, is the fact that it's not only people involved in the fishing industry who listen. So what do you think people outside the fishery tune in?
Well, I think it's a unique window into the soul of Newfoundland and Labrador. And as I said before, the rich dialects that you don't get a chance to hear anywhere else. You get to hear people who speak with a passion, and I think that comes through on the radio. You know, people who call the broadcast, by and large, they know what they're talking about. They're not like, and I don't mean to diminish other private radio stations, the call-in programs, but the people who call the broadcast are not full of bombast, or they don't want to just spread their opinions. They know what they share lived experiences with us, and I think that comes through on the radio.
It's a very emotional show, for sure. I mean, anyone who's tuned in can say that when they hear these callers, these, you know, people in the fishing industry calling in. Is it ever difficult for you, you know, to leave those your own opinions and emotions aside when you try and do the job as host, and then to leave those emotions at work when you go home at the end of the evening?
Absolutely, because I'm always reminded of a story from Round Harbour. There was a series of bad weather during Christmas, winter storms, and there was a man in Round Harbour who lost all his fishing equipment, and he didn't know quite where to turn, and he called me one day because the union couldn't help him and the government couldn't help him, and he saw the broadcast as being the court of last resort. And I felt so bad for him that I didn't know where to turn, and I thought about it. As a matter of fact, I still think about that. That was probably only a month ago, but I still think about that every single day, because, as I said to him, the Minister of Fisheries, of course, cares about his plight. Minister of Fisheries was on the phone-in program last week, and he cares about the fishery, except he might be the Minister of Transportation next week. And that's the reality of it. That's the thing that we have to accept in this business, is that I'm not sure who in government looks after the plight of people like the fishermen in Round Harbour, but he has to realize that there may be nobody, and he may be on his own.
It's interesting, you know, a lot of the issues that I hear you covering, you know, on the broadcast today, issues dealing with the seal hunt, we have the MOU, this new restructuring plan for the fishery. You know, these are things that were being reported on 60 years ago, well, when the broadcast started. What is it that makes issues like this so hard to find a resolution to?
I think it's politics, small p politics, and that's the reality of that. And there may not be anything wrong with that, Josh. It's just that once we accept that, then maybe it makes it easier for people to understand it. But you know, when you look at decisions that have to be made, and this recent MOU, and without getting into the minutiae, but the recent MOU is a good example. It would take very strong political guts for a government to say, yes, we're going to downsize the fishery by as much as 60%, and wear that during an approaching election campaign. And as I've said before, if you're the Minister of Fisheries who wants to support a 60% downsizing of the fishery, and hear somebody in Twillingate say, now, welcome to Twillingate, Minister.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to downsize the fishery by 60%. So, you know, and that may not be a bad thing, the political nature of it. Maybe it keeps the government from making really bad and harsh decisions. But it also stops them from making good decisions, the political nature of it. And I think the people in the fishery are starting to realize that. You know, I use the example of the Minister of Fisheries, Loyola Hearn, now gone as ambassador to Ireland. I don't know how much he cares about the fishery anymore. The ambassador, the fisheries ambassador, Loyola Sullivan, another patronage appointment. Well, the talk is he's going to run for in the federal camp. I don't know how much he cares about the fishery anymore. And that's not to say that that's right or wrong, but that's just the way it is. And I think when people accept that, it makes it a little easier to get by.
Well, it's a good thing they got the broadcast then. At least keep sticking that prod in, as you say.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
I'll tell people to tune in too, because they can win a dory on the broadcast.
That's right.
So tune in to that for sure. 5:30 is on CBC Radio.
Yeah.
We got to take a short break, but when we come back, we've got some great live music right here on Out of the Fog.